March 15, 1943, North Atlantic, 300 miles west of Ireland. The wind howled over the endless black waves, a freezing, merciless rhythm that had become the soundtrack of the Battle of the Atlantic. Beneath the surface, 50 meters down, U-664, a Type VIIC German submarine, crept through the depths like a steel predator. Inside the narrow hull, the air was thick with diesel fumes and sweat. Red emergency lights bathed the control room in a ghostly glow. The men were silent, save for the faint hum of the motors and the creak of metal under pressure. Oberleutnant Zur C. Karl Hoffmann, the 29-year-old commander, leaned over the sonar operator's shoulder. "Any sign of them?" he muttered. The operator shook his head. "Nothing, Herr Cullion, just the ocean." Karl nodded, adjusting his cap. They'd been submerged for nearly 12 hours, hiding from an American convoy that had suddenly turned hunter. Depth charges had rolled off destroyer decks earlier that morning, thunder from above that rattled the steel bones of the U-boat. Now, they waited, silent, patient. Then, something strange crackled through the hydrophone. At first, it sounded like static, then, faintly, a rhythm, a beat. "Wharton Z," the operator whispered, adjusting the dials. "Do you hear that?" Through the distortion came music. A trumpet, a swing rhythm, a melody so alive it didn't belong in the cold belly of the Atlantic. Karl frowned. "What is that?" The operator smiled faintly, incredulous. "It sounds like American music, Herr Cullion, jazz." They all leaned closer as the sound became clear enough to recognize. Musical notes, Moonlight Serenade, Glenn Miller and his orchestra. A few of the younger sailors exchanged nervous glances. It felt impossible, the enemy's music, playing out there, on their frequencies, across the very ocean they fought over. Karl stared at the speaker as if it were haunted. "Switch channels," he ordered. They did. But the music followed, sliding between frequencies. A ghost that refused to die. Outside, in the crushing darkness, the Atlantic carried the melody farther than any bullet or bomb. It wasn't a trick of imagination. It was psychological warfare, the Allies' new weapon, radio propaganda broadcasts. Transmitted from ships and aircraft. Laced with swing, jazz, and the confidence of a world that refused to surrender. And deep beneath the surface, German sailors listened, some in awe, others in quiet dread. For in that music, they heard something the Reich could not command. Freedom. March 16, 1943, 1:20 a.m. North Atlantic. Near convoy HX-229. The U-664 drifted in near silence, its crew still shaken by what they'd heard hours earlier. The melody had faded, but it lingered in their minds like the scent of something forbidden. Glenn Miller, an American name every propaganda officer warned them about, the decadent voice of democracy. Yet in the dark belly of a submarine, that music hadn't sounded decadent at all. It had sounded alive. Oberleutnant Karl Hoffmann sat in the cramped captain's cabin, staring at the thin sheet of paper before him, his last orders from Lorient. Interdict enemy convoy HX-229 at all costs. He'd read those words dozens of times. They felt different now. He turned to his first watch officer, Lieutenant Dieter Rauch, a lean Berliner with restless eyes. "Have you ever heard anything like that before?" Karl asked quietly. Rauch shook his head. "Not at sea, not from the enemy." He hesitated, then added, "My brother used to play clarinet. Before the war, he loved that kind of music." Karl didn't reply. Instead, he reached for the small Bakelite radio unit on the wall, one they used to intercept Allied signals. He turned the dial, slowly, carefully. Static hissed like the ocean itself. Then, faintly, the music again. Musical notes, in the mood. Not words, not propaganda speeches, just rhythm, swing, horns, and laughter woven into sound. A cheerful announcer's voice cut in, speaking perfect German. "Guten Abend, Kameraden, this is the Atlantic voice, bringing you the best music America has to offer. Maybe you're cold, maybe you're tired, but while you hide beneath the waves, we dance under the lights." The men froze. The voice was calm, friendly, almost intimate. It wasn't mocking them, it was inviting them to listen. "Maybe you fight for orders, for a Reich that promises glory. But listen, this is what we fight for." Then came laughter, applause, and another brass-filled tune. Karl switched it off, his jaw tight. "American propaganda," he muttered. "They think they can win by music." But deep down, he knew, it was winning something. Every sailor on his boat had heard it. And when the sea grew still, and the air grew stale, and the diesel fumes made their heads ache, they would remember that music. That sound of a world still full of color, while theirs sank deeper into gray. Elsewhere, above the waves, a British destroyer, HMS Clover, patrolled the convoy lanes. On her deck, a radio operator adjusted his headset. Broadcast range confirmed. Sir, the signal's bouncing clean off the ionosphere tonight. The commanding officer, Lieutenant Commander Henry Wells, nodded. Good, let's give the bastards something to dance to. He lit a cigarette as the loudspeakers blared Glenn Miller into the cold Atlantic air, a symphony for both the living and the hunted. Below, in the steel coffins that stalked them, men listened, whether they wanted to or not. And the sound carried meaning more powerful than torpedoes. April 2, 1943, Allied Command radio station, somewhere near Londonderry, Northern Ireland. The room hummed with machinery, vacuum tubes glowing orange. Reel-to-reel tape spinning. Engineers hunched over dials. In the center stood Major Arthur Art Phillips, U.S. Army Psychological Warfare Division, a former jazz producer from Chicago. Phillips had traded nightclub stages for an invisible front line, the airwaves. Keep it tight between 8.3 and 9 MHz, he told his radio chief. German U-boats are tuned there. We want 'em listening, not switching off. A corporal nodded, setting the frequency. Phillips turned to his British counterpart, Flight Officer Margaret Collins, one of the few women in the unit. You really think they're hearing us down there? He asked. She smiled slightly. Oh, they're hearing it, Major. Reports from captured U-boat men say they've been tapping their feet underwater. Phillips chuckled. Then let's make 'em tap harder. He picked up the microphone. His tone suddenly smooth, conversational, like a late-night DJ. Good evening, boys of the sea. It's cold down there, I know. We hear you're listening. Tonight, Glenn Miller sends you something to warm the heart. Chattanooga choo-choo. A taste of what life sounds like, on the surface. He nodded to the engineer, who dropped the needle. Musical notes, brass horns burst to life. Bright and golden, slicing through static and storm. Margaret looked on, fascinated. They'll call this propaganda, she said, but it's really hope in disguise. Phillips grinned. Exactly, they've got Goebbels shouting orders in their ears. Let's give them swing. Meanwhile, deep beneath the same sea, the crew of U-664 had been submerged for 16 hours straight. Oxygen was thin, the battery smelled of acid. Every breath felt heavier. And yet, through the hum of the engines, that familiar sound returned, faint, but distinct. Trumpets, saxophones, a woman's laughter echoing faintly through the static. Fritz Becker, the radioman, whispered, "They're back, Herr Kallian." Karl Hoffmann closed his eyes. "Turn it off." Fritz hesitated. "Sir, maybe it's better to let the men hear something besides the engines." Karl looked at his crew. Pale, weary, sleepless. For a moment, he relented. "One song," he said. The music filled the submarine. Muffled by steel but alive all the same. Men leaned against bulkheads, closing their eyes. Some smiled faintly, remembering a world they hadn't seen in months. Cafes, warm lights, laughter. Rauch whispered, "They sound like they're winning, don't they?" Karl didn't answer. He just stared into the red glow of the control room, listening to the rhythm that no torpedo could silence. Back on land, in Berlin, Propaganda Minister Joseph Goebbels slammed a report onto his desk. "Unacceptable," he shouted. "The Americans are using music to undermine morale. Find who is responsible for monitoring Allied frequencies and fix it." An aide, trembling, replied, "Mein Herr, our crews report that it's impossible to jam them entirely. The signals bounce across the ocean. Even from aircraft." Goebbels sneered, "Then drown them out. Give them our music. Wagner, marches, not this degeneracy." But he knew it was too late. The war of sound had begun, and his enemy's notes carried freedom's charm. In the Atlantic nights that followed, U-boat crews began to joke about the ghost DJ, an unseen American voice that haunted the ocean. It wasn't the bombs that unnerved them most anymore. It was that music. Because when you're trapped below the surface, every melody becomes a memory. And every trumpet a reminder that the world above still dances. April 17, 1943, Mid-Atlantic Gap, the Black Pit. The sky was a bruised grey, and the ocean below it a restless steel sheet. This stretch of water was the loneliest on Earth, too far for Allied air cover. Too deep for rescue. The German Navy called it Das Schwarze Loch, the Black Pit. And that's where U-664 now stalked her prey. Inside the control room, the air was tense. The men whispered over sonar clicks as they tracked a convoy's faint propeller thrum. The smell of sweat and oil clung to the walls. "Depth 10 meters, speed 2 knots, ordered Oberleutnant Karl Hoffmann. His voice was steady, but his eyes were hollow from sleeplessness. The helmsman adjusted course. The submarine glided forward, a silent killer beneath the waves. Then, out of nowhere, the sonar headphones picked up another signal. Another escort? Carl asked. The operator frowned. No, sir, it's music. Carl's face hardened. Again? The operator nodded, almost sheepishly. It's the same frequency as before. He turned the dials. Through the crackle came the unmistakable blare of brass. Musical notes, Don't Sit Under the Apple Tree, the Andrews Sisters. It was cheerful, playful, full of swing and warmth. It didn't belong in this place of pressure and fear. And yet, it was here, carried by invisible waves through the water, right into the enemy's steel heart. One of the younger sailors, Matthias, couldn't help but hum along softly. Mein Schwester liebet dieses Lied, he murmured. Before the war, she played it on the gramophone. Another sailor grinned faintly. You think the Yanks know we're listening? Carl said nothing. He just stared at the depth gauge, his mind torn between duty and the ghostly sound of life on the surface. Then came a distant boom. Depth charges, shouted the hydrophone operator. The room exploded into motion, alarms blared, valves hissed, water dripped from the ceiling. The crew braced as shockwaves rippled through the hull. Outside, in the ink-black water, Allied destroyers circled, listening, hunting. The U-boat dove hard. 60 meters, 80, 100. Each detonation came closer, shaking dust from the rivets. And still, faintly, impossibly, that same melody carried on, blending with the thunder. Musical notes, I'll be waiting for you, sang the Andrews Sisters. Their voices soft but defiant. The irony was unbearable. Rauch, gripping a pipe overhead, laughed bitterly. They're bombing us to swing music. Carl shouted over the noise. Hold depth at 120 meters. The submarine groaned, metal strained, the lights flickered, then steadied. For a moment, silence returned, only the faint hiss of air compressors. And then, through the ringing in their ears, a quiet voice over the radio. You're deep now, aren't you? Cold, tired, hunted, but we're still up here, playing music for you. It was that same Allied broadcaster. Calm, confident. This one's for the sailors in the dark. Don't lose your rhythm, or your soul. Then came American Patrol. The men said nothing. Even as they drifted in silence, something inside him began to unravel, not from fear of death, but from the haunting reminder that the world above had light, laughter, music. Things worth fighting for, not merely under orders. Carl sat back, the sweat on his forehead mixing with condensation. In his mind, he pictured the enemy, sailors standing under bright lights, laughing, dancing, alive. And for the first time since the war began, he envied them. 2 days later, aboard HMS Clover, the crew celebrated another safe convoy arrival. On deck, sailors shared cigarettes as Glenn Miller's orchestra echoed from a shipboard radio. Lieutenant Commander Henry Wells leaned against the rail, listening to the laughter and music. Funny thing, he said to his communications officer. That broadcast might have reached them, the ones down there. The officer nodded. You think it makes a difference? Wells smiled faintly. If it makes them remember they're human, it makes all the difference. The sea stretched endless around them, cold, grey, vast. And somewhere beneath, in the deep dark, another crew drifted silently, listening to the same song. May 9, 1943, 2:40 a.m. Mid-Atlantic, west of the Azores. The ocean was glass, the stars were faint behind clouds, and the sea breathed like a sleeping beast. For U-664, this night felt unnaturally calm. No convoys, no sonar pings, no explosions, just stillness. Inside, the men were restless. The air was thick with carbon dioxide. Every breath felt heavy. The radioman, Fritz Becker, turned the dials again, half from duty, half from boredom. His headphones crackled, then caught a faint transmission. He stiffened. Herr Kallian, it's him again. Carl Hoffman, half asleep in the command chair, opened his eyes. The Americans? Yes, sir, same voice. Fritz turned a knob, and once again, sound filled the submarine, but this time it wasn't Glenn Miller. It was something different. A low, mournful trumpet, slow and deliberate, a string of pearls. It was beautiful, and unbearably sad. Then the voice came, low and measured, with that same unshakable calm. Good evening, sailors of the deep, this is the Atlantic voice again. You're far from home tonight. Maybe you wonder what all this is for. We wonder too. The men exchanged looks. The voice continued. They tell you we're monsters. They tell us the same about you. But we know, you're young men, far from home, listening in the dark, So here's one from Glenn Miller's band, a tune for anyone who remembers dancing. Fritz swallowed hard. Some of the crew smiled faintly. Others looked away, pretending not to listen. The music rose, brass and rhythm filling the stale submarine air. Rauch leaned close to Carl. If Berlin knew we were sitting here listening to this. Carl interrupted softly. Berlin doesn't have to know. He let the song play to its end. For 2 minutes, the war outside didn't exist. But the spell broke when the hydrophone operator jerked upright. Contact bearing 072, distant propellers. Could be an escort. Instantly, the control room came alive. Orders snapped out, wheels spun, gauges trembled. Carl's voice was crisp now. Down to 60 meters, silent running. The crew obeyed, every motion rehearsed and desperate. The U-boat slipped beneath the waves like a ghost. Above, a British destroyer, HMS Tay, swept her searchlights across the rolling black. Her sonar men leaned close to their screens. Picking something faint, sir, said the petty officer, could be them. Lieutenant Commander Wells stepped to the speaker. Send him a present. Moments later, the sea erupted, depth charges rolled and plunged, tumbling end over end into the dark. Boom, boom, boom. Shockwaves hammered the U-boat. Lights flickered, panels rattled, men gritted their teeth as the hull screamed under pressure. The sonar operator yelled, 15 meters above us, they're right overhead. And then, through the shaking and the chaos, came something impossible. A melody. The broadcast again, bleeding through the static, as if the sea itself was singing it. Musical notes, when the lights go on again, all over the world. Carl froze. The lyrics were faint but clear enough to sting. We'll have time for things like wedding rings, when the lights go on again. For a long moment, the war felt like a dream, cruel, endless, and senseless. Then another explosion cracked the air, jolting them back to survival. Carl shouted, all stop, maintain depth. They waited, silent, trembling, until the last echo faded. Finally, the operator whispered, they're gone. The U-boat floated in silence once more. The men stared at one another, hollow-eyed. Carl leaned against the steel wall, breathing hard. When the lights go on again, he murmured, what will be left of us to see them? No one answered. The music had stopped, but its echo, and its meaning, lingered in the stale air. On the surface, HMS Tay pulled away. Commander Wells stood on the bridge, the cigarette smoke drifting past his face. The sea was calm again. His communications officer approached, broadcast still transmitting. Sir, same song. Wells nodded. Good, let it play, maybe it'll reach them down there. He looked out across the dark horizon, toward a war he could neither see nor understand. Only feel. Sometimes, he said softly, music reaches farther than any bomb. June 1, 1943. U-664 limped home toward France. Engines coughing, morale thin as paper. The crew spoke little. When they finally reached Brest, a grey dawn broke over the Atlantic, the same ocean that had carried Glenn Miller's voice to them. Night after night. As they disembarked, young Matthias lingered on deck, staring at the water. Rauch called out, come on, boy, leave the sea to its ghosts. But Matthias only smiled faintly. Maybe the ghosts just wanted to play us a song. He turned away. Behind him, the sea rolled on, endless, indifferent, carrying with it the last notes of a trumpet fading into the fog. And somewhere above the clouds, on a radio beam reaching across the Atlantic, Glenn Miller's orchestra played again. The war raged on, the music never stopped.